So this was prophesied in the Old Testament, the book of Isaiah. From Isaiah, just as there were many that were appalled at him, his appearance was so disfigured beyond that of any man, and his form marred beyond human likeness. And another verse, I offered my back to those who beat me, my cheeks to those who pulled out my beard. I did not hide my face from mocking and spitting, which here it seems to indicate they may have even pulled out pieces of his beard during this process. So this is from again from the movie The Passion of Christ. You see this is where Pilate brings Jesus back out prior to having him crucified, and you can see he's just covered in blood on the process. We pick up in Mark. The soldiers put a purple robe on him, twisted together a crown of thorns, and set it on him. And they began to call out to him, "Hail, King of the Jews!" Again and again they struck him on the head with a staff and spit on him. Falling on their knees, they paid homage to him. And when they had mocked him, they took off the purple robe and put his own clothes on him. Then they led him out to crucify him. So this crown of thorns was actually more of a cap-like structure instead of the band-like structure usually that's shown in artwork. The thorns had about 1 to 1.5 inch spikes. This would have been forced down onto the scalp, which would have caused significant damage. There's very little connective tissue beneath the scalp itself. So this would have caused a loss of blood, deep bruising, not to mention just severe nerve pain, this electric shock-like sensation traveling through the skull. And to add insult to injury, at that point his robe would be ripped off of him, which would only reopen these clotting wounds. You think about it, it's like a Band-Aid over a wound that's a cut that started to heal, and ripping it off, it starts to bleed yet again. So this is just a picture of some of the thorns, how sharp they would have been. Again, another picture of the Passion of Christ. They just about got it right. It just about completely covers the head there. And just as a little tie-in to our answers in Genesis, we've been talking about in Life Group, we read from Genesis, "Cursed is the ground because of you. In toil you will eat of it all the days of your life. Both thorns and thistles it shall grow for you, and you will eat the plants of the field." Now, some scholars see this as being symbolic. This was the curse of man's original sin. When Adam and Eve first sinned in the garden, they had this curse placed on them which represented sin. And of course, at this point, Jesus is actually taking it for us, carrying it to the cross in our place. The Via Dolorosa actually literally means the way of pain and suffering. It's a traditional route taken by Jesus from the Praetorium, or the place where he was sentenced, to Golgotha, where he was actually crucified. It was about a half-mile journey through the middle of town. We read in John, "So the soldiers took charge of Jesus, carrying his own cross. He went out to the place of the skull, which in Aramaic is called Golgotha. There they crucified him, and with 2 others, one on each side and Jesus in the middle." There's been some debate about whether or not Jesus actually carried the whole cross or just the crossbar. The full cross would have weighed over 300 pounds. The crossbar, the patibulum, would have been about 100 pounds. Most scholars today feel like it was just the crossbar that he actually carried. It would have been bound to his arms and shoulders with rope, and he would have had an escort with the centurion and the 4 soldiers. Just a little map here showing from the Praetorium and going through the lower city outside of the city walls to Golgotha here. So this would have caused, if you think about it, carrying this on the shoulders, painful splinters which would have braided the skin on top of the shoulders, caused extensive blood loss, more thirst, dehydration, pending shock. And the Bible does not say that Jesus stumbled and fell. It only implies it. And more than likely it's thought that he did, which, if you think about it, would have caused a significant chest contusion. If you're walking around with a crossbar tied like this and you trip and fall, you can't put your arms in front of you to catch yourself. And usually people are going to bring their head back, and it's going to be a direct blow to the chest itself. And some people have compared this to the force of being in a motor vehicle accident, we'll see in just a second. And this would cause damage to the heart itself. And probably most importantly, at this point, there would be fluid starting to build up on the lungs and the heart. Okay, this is a video just showing a fall and the chest contusion and some of the issues that he had on the Via Dolorosa.
Jesus centered on his chest. That would slam the heart against the breastbone, the sternum inside. That could bruise the heart.
A bruised heart is a very serious injury. The muscle has been damaged, and so it tends to stretch. And as the heart is pumping, that stretch increases, and you have a balloon, which we call an aneurysm. That balloon becomes thin-walled and can then rupture.
The injury is similar to chest trauma sustained in a car accident, when the driver is not wearing a seatbelt and is thrown against the steering wheel.
So you see how traumatic that alone would have been, just carrying the cross to Golgotha. So Golgotha was the location of Jesus' crucifixion. The English word Calvary actually comes from the Latin root word calvarius, which means place of the skull. They don't really know if it was named for the shape of the hill, was in the shape of the skull, or due to a collection of bones and skulls that were actually lying nearby. It was, as mentioned earlier, outside the city walls, as required by the Mosaic Law. And as we mentioned earlier, too, this would have been a strategic location, usually along a busy road, where the Jews coming into town for Passover would have seen it. There are several different kinds of crosses. Typically in art, we see this one called a Latin cross. But most today feel like he would have been crucified on what this one right here is called a tau cross with the Greek letter T. There would have been actually an upright post standing on the place of execution that was there already, called a stipes. And as you see, Jesus carrying the continuum on the crossbar here. Once he was nailed to this crossbeam, this would have been hoisted up on top of the upright stake here. So this efficiency that they had would have made it much more efficient. When they arrived, Jesus was offered wine mixed with gall, or Mark said calls it myrrh. This would have been used as a sedative. Of course, Jesus refused this. Quote John MacArthur. He says he had come to the cross to be a sin bearer, and he would feel the full effect of the sin he bore. He would endure the full measure of his pain. So he did not take any shortcuts. And at this point, garments would be ripped away yet again, and this would only reopen the wounds yet again. There's some question whether or not Jesus was completely naked on the cross, or was he clothed. Some people look at this verse in Psalm, all my bones are on display. People stare and gloat over me. They divide my clothes among them and cast lots for my garment. But Jewish custom forbid public nakedness, so most scholars feel like most likely at least he wore a loincloth. This is one of the possible sites of Golgotha here. See, it's supposed to look like a skull. The eye is right here. Most importantly, you see it's elevated. Busy road over here. People coming into town could have seen people being crucified up here. So the nails themselves, the nailing of Jesus' hand, is actually not mentioned in the gospel narrative whenever they're talking about the crucifixion of Jesus. The only reason we know that Jesus was nailed to the cross is from one reference in the New Testament. That's from John. And it's regarding doubting Thomas's comments. Unless I see the nail marks in his hands and put my finger where the nails were and put my hand into his side, I will not believe. These Roman nails were about 7 inches long. They were thought to have magic healing abilities. They were very valuable. People saved them as like medical amulets. Whenever these were nailed in the hand and wrist, they would damage what's called the median nerve, a major nerve branch in the middle part of the wrist. This would cause severe nerve pain or neuropathic pain, and it would actually cause a claw hand. The fingers would curl in whenever this nail passed through that nerve. It's been described as a lightning bolt pain, actually traveling up the arm. It's actually probably one of the most severe pains that are imaginable. And just here a place to mention the word, you think about the word excruciating or excruciate, it's taken from the word excruciatus, which literally means out of the cross. So the Romans did not have a word to describe the severe pain that was associated with crucifixion. They actually would call it being out of the cross. The next time you say something excruciating, you can think about There's some question whether or not he was nailed in the hands or the wrists. Traditional art, of course, shows the palms of the hands, but today most people feel like it was the wrists. Several reasons for that. One was the actual Greek word is chire, which was used in the original Greek, which actually referred to the hands and the wrists. It wasn't just the hand. And an example of that is from the book of Acts. The angel struck Peter on the side and woke him up, and the chain fell off Peter's wrists, or chire is the word used there as well. Another reason is because a nail through the middle of the hand would have just torn through the connective tissue and would not likely have sustained the weight of a person like that. So it's felt now you've been nailed in this part. This is called the flexor retinaculum, a strong ligament right here. But you can also see that yellow is the median nerve right here. It would go right through the middle of that nerve, and it would shot the electric pain would have shot out through the fingers and then up the arm as well. So this is a picture of what it would have looked like through the wrist, and you can see the claw hand starting to form as well. This is just another picture. This is supposed to show you in relation to the tibulum here, the crossbar, the nail actually passing in through here, through the structures. And obviously this would have passed between the bones. It would not have caused any fractures there. So after being nailed, the crossbar would be hoisted up on top of the upright stake. We have a picture of this in just a second. It's called a mortise and tenon joint. No nails would be used at that point. And obviously this would cause extreme pain in the hands and wrists whenever it was actually set into place. That would have pulled on the soft tissues of the hand and wrist as well as the nerves, and that would have been excruciatingly painful. And it would have caused shoulder dislocation, which would have made it much more difficult to breathe. So this is a mortise and tenon joint. So you can see if they would have hoisted it up on top, fit over the top of the stipes, but once it was in place, all of Jesus' body weight would have pulled on his hand because his feet had not been nailed at that point. The nails through the feet, they could have either been through stacked feet, one on top of each other on the front of the cross, as we typically picture, or individually on the sides of the feet, on the sides of the cross, through the heel bone or calcaneus. With the stacked feet on top, there would be no knee flexion, so all the body weight would be on the hands and the wrists, so usually the person would not survive quite as long in that situation. Really, the ability to be able to lock the knees or not was a major determinant in how long the person would survive while on the cross. Either way, it would destroy the artery, the blood flow to the foot, cause further blood loss, damage the nerves, much like in the hand and the wrist. That would cause this lancinating electric pain up the legs. Most scholars today feel like most of the crucifixions during that time were usually people were tied to the crossbar with their arms, and their feet were nailed to the sides of the cross like this. So arms tied, feet nailed through the sides. And what that would give is the person would be able to push up on his feet, and they could be out there for days on end. Of course, we know that Jesus, we feel like he was actually nailed through the front of his feet and the stacked feet, again, which would have given a quicker death, and we know that his hands were nailed also. There's some question, too, whether or not actually being nailed through the heel bones, would that be considering a piercing of the bones, or would that be a fracture of the bones? To me, it seems like it would be a fracture, but as, of course, you know about the prophecy of broken bones,